It used to be that we were surrounded by cornfields, and they would gather the corn in the middle of the night frequently. And I still, sometimes, if I'm up in the night, I look out and I will see a light, and I will think first, oh, they're gathering corn. And then I realize it's a street light.
By the late 1960s, it was impossible to keep up with development. The local Board of Education had built 8 new high schools and 22 public schools. The Ontario Vocational Centre was expanded into Fanshawe College. The University of Western Ontario evicted the Hunt Club golf course from its property because the land was needed for a $30 million expansion program. Through it all, suburbia kept flowing towards the city's new boundaries.
London is a beautiful city, and the growth of any worthwhile home development must offer the same good taste, convenient services, and room for future growth of the individual, family, or community. We are well aware that this prestige is the result of sound planning that contributes to the solidarity of Greater London. Herb J. McClure, President of McClure Construction Limited.
In a sign of the times, McClure would serve out 2 terms as mayor. His successor wasn't as lucky. In February of 1972, Fred Gosnell, mayor for less than 2 months, suffered a heart seizure and resigned. The next month, one disbelieving Toronto paper reported that a James Bigelow had been elected to London's top job.
When we were approaching a door going into a meeting, I stepped forward in a hurry and opened the door and held it for Mayor Bigelow, and she turned and said in what I thought was a rather disapproving term, "You don't have to do that for me." And my reply was, if I didn't do it, Mayor Bigelow, my mother would turn over in her grave.
Denied a law degree by her family, Jane Bigelow had studied gymnastics, folk dancing, and community planning. First elected to City Council in 1969, she had also served as president of the local NDP Association. She would have been an unusual choice for mayor in any Canadian city, but her arrival was a shockwave to staid old London.
Men in those days weren't used to having a woman who was a boss, as it were, or had a position that was perhaps a little higher than theirs. And that I felt all the time when I was on council, that undercurrent. It was always there. So I think that was part of it too. The world was changing and people weren't able to keep up quite as fast as maybe they should.
She had the ability to work with people and to bring out the best in the people that were around her. And as I say, she put aside her basic political philosophy so as to apply objectivity, which to me is a very important and a not too often possessed characteristic of people in leadership roles.
As only the second female mayor of a major Canadian city, Bigelow brought a radical new vision to London. She fought for accessible daycare, shelters for battered women, funding for the arts, and better city planning. Unlike the mayors before her, Bigelow was cool to new development, arguing the city was big enough already.
Developers are always seen as being bad guys, which is unfair, frankly, because London has had nothing but very good developers, with few exceptions. But they got themselves into a bad reputation, so it was a chance for people to say, slow it down, stop it, let's take a breather, see where we're going.
Londoners were fascinated by a mayor who rode a bicycle to official events and who refused to wear a hat in the presence of Queen Elizabeth. Her support of the local arts community and cultural events like the Home County Folk Festival also won her a legion of voters who kept her in office for 6 unpretentious years.
We used to hold this stupid little thing called the Spring Festival in the Croxton Common every year. We were absolutely just stunned come the morning of the Spring Festival when this car turns up and the mayor gets out. And we didn't know what to do with her that first year. She ran the egg and spoon race, as I recall, and did okay, but she didn't exactly distinguish herself. The next year, though, we knew she was coming, so we went to incredible lengths and constructed a life-size board for a game of chess. And of course, we let her be the White Queen. We had a special crown made for her, which of course she put on in her role as the White Queen. And I think it had been maybe that year, maybe the year before, that Queen Elizabeth had come to London. And great frou-frou was raised because the mayor would not wear a hat to greet the Queen. And I guess this was just the way it was done in terms of the big protocol. But she had no problem wearing a hat as long as she could be the Queen.
In 1976, Bigelow fell in with the supporters of a new art gallery and museum. The dual-purpose building would be constructed at the Forks of the Thames on the site of Simcoe's original visit. The project would be Bigelow's most lasting legacy to the artistic community she adored. It would also be one of her biggest political mistakes.
And they got Raymond Moriyama to design this blessed thing. It was seen as a bit of a grab by the rank and file, blue-collar workers, people like myself. We didn't particularly we liked the idea of an art gallery. We didn't like what happened. She sided with the establishment, and that was shocking. And I think it was perhaps the one singular point that cut down a lot of her support.
2 years later, London voters rejected Bigelow in favor of Al Gleason, a former Western Mustang who confessed he rarely attended cultural events.
There was a gang on council who wanted to take me out of there, and they succeeded. I know that there was at least one meeting of council members where they worked at drafting a member of council to run, and I guess they succeeded in getting Al Gleason to run. And what was behind all of that, I'm not entirely sure. But I think it had a lot to do perhaps with the development industry and perhaps the business community.
The city had to get moving. It had to come out of the slumber time, Sleepy Hollow village atmosphere. Either take it and be that and just go down slowly, or catch the wave, so to speak.
In a 1980 broadcast of television's All in the Family, the character of Archie Bunker quipped, "Who the hell ever heard of London, Ontario?" 2 years later, most of the world had.
I'd just like to thank everybody for coming here, for making this day so special for me. I was so excited about coming home because there's nothing like home. Your home means your family and your friends.
Karen Baldwin was the only Canadian and the only Londoner to win the title Miss Universe. The former sales clerk symbolized the new face of London over the next 10 years. It was no longer enough for the city to excel on its own terms. It had to reach for glamorous, world-class status. While 1980s development didn't have the civic boosterism of the 1960s, it compensated by sheer size. Towers of tinted glass and steel rose from the skyline, dwarfing the Dominion Public Building, the city's tallest structure for 40 years. Convention centers and road expansions became the municipal construction of choice. In the suburbs, the real estate boom rolled over farmland, prompting another annexation that swallowed the village of Lambeth and most of Westminster Township. London now had a larger population than the nation's capital. The city's medical reputation grew during the 1980s. Victoria Hospital expanded while University Hospital became renowned for its work on immunology, sports medicine, and heart research. London's 3 supermalls went on a renovation and enlargement spree in a battle to prove who was the biggest and the best. Parking at White Oaks became so cramped, the mall's owners were forced to tear down a building just for extra space. Even the downtown area received its own 2-block shopping center in an attempt to lure customers back to the core. The growth obscured the alarming fact that many of the city's corporations ceased to be locally owned. For the first time in its history, London's economic future was not controlled by Londoners. Author Orlo Miller had spent most of his life giving London's history a voice. He now stood on the sidelines, watching much of his vision fall to progress. In 1988, he published his final book, This Was London.